telescopes are based on them, studying evolution of galaxy clustering, finding baryonic acoustic oscillations, measuring redshift space distortions. All these things can provide us with valuable cosmological tests, which basically tell us what universe we live in. The slight problem here is that with all these cosmological tests, in principle, what we would like to measure is the underlying dark matter field, because this is what is the real content of the universe, dark matter and dark energy. In the same time, what we practically observe are almost uniquely baryons, and even more, almost uniquely only a fraction of baryons, mostly those which are embedded in galaxies and other objects which we can see, like intergalactic medium. A large part of baryons is missing in the present day universe, for example, but we are not going to go there. The point is that observing galaxies and other sources like AGNs, we need to keep in mind that these objects are not bad tracers of the underlying dark matter field, but they are very biased tracers, meaning they trace dark matter field, but not exactly accurately. And moreover, the way how they are located in the density field depends both on cosmic time, changes with cosmic time, and depends on galaxy properties. We find different galaxies in different environments. Then on one hand, we have some big questions like, is lambda CDM model correct? How can we measure precisely cosmic parameters? On the other hand, we need to solve the puzzle, how to relate different type of galaxies to large-scale structure and then to provide precise cosmological measurements. And nowadays, we are finally getting both big cosmological data, which really allow us for very good statistics, and multi-wavelength coverage of this data, which allows us for a complete census of very different type of galaxies, going deep with redshifts, and then understanding really well how these different types of extragalactic objects trace the underlying dark matter field. And I'm going to try to convince you that North ecliptic pole is going to be a unique inventory for both of these things. But we have some challenges. We need some automated but impenetrable approach to the problem of this big data, to finding out what we have in them. And we need to understand better how these different galaxies, different objects trace large-scale structure and how this evolves with time. So now I'm going to give you very biased review of some recent works which are ongoing in our group now, which may point a bit in this direction and may be worth to be applied in the NEP field studies. Then here, the next couple of slides are based on the data from the VIMOS Public Extragalactic Redshift Survey, 90,000 spectroscopically measured galaxies at redshift above 0.5. Now, a large part of this data is public, so you can go and play by yourself. This is also a good thing. And we may ask one question at first: how many galaxy populations do we see? And one thing we find is that actually, if we go really into detail, we find that in galaxy colors and other properties, what we find is that the galaxy population seems to be very, very precisely, not only bimodal, but also bigaussian. Then the idea that between blue and red population, there is some transition part, some excess which would correspond to green galaxies, seems to be more an artifact resulting from the fact that this bimodal distribution seems to shift with redshift and with stellar mass. And if we divide our samples into small enough bins, we get perfect bimodalities. Well, then overall galaxies can be divided into blue and red. Is life so simple? Not exactly. If we want to really go into detail, we need much more sophisticated tool than just one set of colors, one color plot, or two sets of properties to make just a simple two-dimensional plot. If we use some kind of well-constructed multi-dimensional feature space like here, and go for some automated method, we can find that actually we can very nicely distinguish more subgroups. Here you can see the main sequence-like plot, star formation versus stellar mass, with some blue groups of galaxies, green groups of galaxies, red groups of galaxies. And you may ask, how does it correspond to this bimodal distribution? Well, blue and green are mostly blue, red are mostly red, but still inside we have some different groups, and we find similar divisions also at low redshift. So we find corresponding groups both at redshift 0.7, 0.8 at the local universe. Now the problem with all this kind of automated approach to division of galaxies or any other objects in principle is that people always ask, is it just some artificial cut in multi-parameter space, or can we interpret it somehow in terms of galaxy evolution, galaxy physics? Is there something behind which really tells us that these groups are different, that they are just not smoothly sliding from one to the other? So a way to go for that is to try to look into the dependencies on parameters which were not used in the process of classification at all. And this is work which is very close to be finalized now. We are going to submit it soon. And we studies the dependence of these groups we found in the Vipers data on local environment. And then we found that in principle, not surprisingly, at redshift 0.7, 0.8, we see the same trend as in the local universe. We have more blue galaxies in the field. Their fraction decreases with the increasing local density. Red galaxies are more abundant in dense environments, and green galaxies follow weaker but the same trend. But if you go more into detail, you find out that, for example, sizes and also surface densities of red galaxies for two groups rise with local density, and for one group are surprisingly stable. Then this is a real difference. This tells us that their evolutionary path might have been different, and in principle the reddest group might have been formed just by stopping production of stars suddenly at some point in the past. So they are compact red galaxies in the dense environments, while the other groups a little bit differently, but grew also through mergers, and they are correspondingly larger in denser environments. For the blue galaxies, on the other hand, we are quite used to the notion that blue galaxies are abundant in less dense environment, less abundant in dense environment, more abundant in less dense environment. But we actually find out that this trend is driven by one most numerous group of blue galaxies, and there are other subtypes of blue galaxies which do not follow this trend at all. And in principle, star-forming galaxies containing AGNs also do not show this strong environmental dependence. This is also something which may be useful for us in the future to go deeper. And when we go to the green galaxies, they behave counterintuitively, but in a bit different sense, because we find that in their case, the main difference is in their mass. Massive galaxies behave more like blue galaxies. Less massive galaxies behave more like red, meaning they are less abundant in dense environments. So this is something which is opposite to the trends we see in blue and red galaxies. With yet bigger statistics in future surveys, we can see what happens then. Now, one very important type of objects in this kind of data are AGNs. And with AGNs, we always have problems, first of all, how to define them. Different diagnostics give us different types of AGNs. You will have a couple of talks about different problems about automated finding of AGNs today later. But I just want to show that having properly large samples, here there is a kind of advertisement of our work on the kids data, where we had admittedly very large training sample and very large sample to classify, and we can see that we can reasonably well recover expected statistics of such quasar. Then difficult but doable. Now time is running out. I just remind you that we already did some clustering studies for NEP deep galaxies in the past. For example, we studied the clustering of 24 millimeter selected galaxies and found that they are living in massive galaxy halos, and we can find them up to redshift 2. We can look for more interesting populations of galaxies in NEP white now. And just the word of maybe caution, but maybe also something we would like to dwell in more, is that right now for clustering studies for most of us mean measuring the correlation function. But there are more refined tools, for example, marked correlation function, which tells you not only how galaxies cluster, but how they cluster if we mark them according to their specific properties. For example, mass or color or luminosity in some given band. And if we do that, we find out that the clustering of galaxies on small scales is far from trivial. for example, massive galaxies tend to stick together. Similarly, massive galaxies tend to be in pairs. Similarly, star-forming galaxies rather tend to avoid each other. Usually, we say that K-band is good to trace stellar mass. We can see that K-band is the best among all, but not exactly like stellar mass. We can say that U-band is very good proxy of star formation. Again, when we look at clustering, we find out that yes, it's close, but not exactly like star formation. Then here on small scales, there is a wealth of information still to recover about galaxies being close together, share their properties or not. And then, this is my last slide, also a word of caution about interpretability of correlation function. Usually, we try to interpret it by some simpler or more complex models, either some simple modeling or halo occupation distribution formalism right now, in order to derive from the correlation function such parameters as, for example, halo mass of a given, typical halo mass of a given population of galaxies. And also we find out that depending on how we implement the model behind, we can get some not so insignificant systematic. For example, usually we assume that we are dealing with spherically symmetric halos. We all remember this old joke about spherically symmetric chaos. So spherically symmetric halos, while usually halos, especially for massive galaxies, are not exactly symmetric. And then if we take this fact into account, we find out that we may systematically bias our measurement of the underlying masses of dark matter halos. This is also something we should take into account in the future studies. So I'm already out of time. Thank you for your patience. And again, I hope we can do many more, much more precise studies with the NEP in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, the session is open for questions and comments. Anyone? Any online participants, questions or comments? Dennis, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. So I have a question related to the green galaxy. You showed that, some of them evolved like the blue one, the more massive ones, and the other ones like the red ones. But do you see any evolution between all these different color galaxies from, I don't know, less massive to more massive, blue to green, or something like this? Do you have a pattern?
In the present moment, we didn't have sufficient statistics to trace the evolution. I expect we should have. We have a hint of such an evolution between redshift 1 and redshift, say, 0.5, 0.6, but the statistics was not big enough for that. Something to try in the future, but yes.
Yeah, with probably a larger sample.
Yes.
It may be possible to see if you have to see anything evolving. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? No question from online? Okay, if not, let's thank Agnieszka again.
Thank you very much.